The name on the mailbox wasn't mine anymore. And suddenly neither was the house. I didn't expect a welcome sign. I didn't expect casseroles on the porch or anyone waiting in the driveway with a tissue box and a memory. But I also didn't expect that brass plate to be gone. The one that used to read Hastings bold and centered right above the mail slot Grandpa built with his own hands. In its place, Langford etched in cursive like it had always been there. For a second I thought maybe I'd pulled into the wrong driveway. But then I saw it, the crack on the left column. Grandpa never bothered to fix the birdhouse, hanging slightly crooked above the front porch light. No, this was the house. My house. Or it was supposed to be. I killed the engine and just sat there watching the sun dip lower through the oak trees that lined the street. I used to lie on that porch in the summers, counting cicada calls and drawing stories in the dust. Grandpa would sit beside me with sweet tea and a quiet smile like I was exactly where I belonged. No judgment, no expectations, just presence. Now all I could feel was absence. When I stepped out, my boots crunched against the gravel the same way they had since high school. I walked up to the porch and, almost out of habit, reached under the ceramic frog next to the flower pot. The key was still there. That was the first crack in the lie. Inside, the scent hit me before I could process the rest: lavender spray, lemon cleaner, and something sharper, colder. The warmth of Grandpa's cologne had been wiped away. In its place, sterility. Boxes lined the living room wall stacked by category. Kitchen, donations, Brittany's room. And then I saw it, my name scrawled across a cardboard flap. Claire's childhood. Sort or toss. Sort or toss. That's what my memories had been reduced to. I followed the sound of a voice, humming in the kitchen. Brittany. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt that read, "Grateful, thankful, blessed." She turned around casually, spoon in hand like I was the UPS guy. "Oh," she blinked, "you're early." For what I asked. Brittany leaned against the counter like she lived there. "We're prepping for staging. The realtor's coming next week to shoot the place. You might want to grab anything sentimental before it's boxed up." I just stared. "You're selling the house." "Well," she drawled, "it's kind of already in escrow." That was when I heard the door open again behind me. My parents. Vera swept in, first heels sharp on the hardwood. She gave me that same tight smile she wore at Grandpa's funeral. "Claire, I was hoping we'd catch you. I told Brittany to start tidying up early. We didn't think you'd come by so soon." "Why would you think I wouldn't?" I said. Griffin followed behind, quiet as always, hands buried in his pockets. He didn't meet my eyes. Vera didn't flinch. "The house was under the family trust, sweetheart. It's just not practical for you to keep it. You live in Austin. You have work. You're not settled enough for something like this." I felt something twist in my chest. "Grandpa said this house was mine. He told me." "Well," she said, brushing a non-existent speck off her sleeve, "verbal promises don't hold up in probate." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a tidy sentence to sweep me aside. I moved down the hallway without another word. Toward the study. Toward the only place that still smelled like cedar and ink and the faint whisper of memory. The desk was still there, smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just grown into the absence. I opened the drawers one by one. Receipts, a broken pocket watch, Grandpa's reading glasses. Then I found it, a narrow wooden compartment beneath the bottom drawer, barely visible. I pressed gently. It popped open. Inside, carved into the wood, were 3 initials, CMH, Claire Margaret Hastings. I sat back on my heels, breath caught in my throat. This drawer hadn't been opened recently, not even cleaned. No one else had found it. Maybe they hadn't looked. There wasn't much inside, just a velvet pouch and a folded sheet of thick paper. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a full document, just a note, scribbled in Grandpa's rough script. "If they try to claim it, go look where the willow meets the stone." I read it twice, Then I carefully folded it and slipped it into my bag. When I walked out, my parents were chatting casually with Brittany about paint samples. I didn't say a word, just grabbed my coat and left. That night back in my apartment, I opened a new folder on my desk and labeled it in thick black marker, Truth. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd walk away, but they forgot who raised me. And more importantly, they forgot what he left behind. The next morning, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my small apartment in Austin, stacks of papers and open tabs cluttering the coffee table. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I couldn't stop going over every document, every timestamp, every photo. Something didn't add up, and that something was a contract bearing my name. The scanned file had come from a shared legal folder my mother emailed late the night before, probably assuming I wouldn't bother reading it. But I did, line by line. And there it was, my full name, Claire Hastings, scribbled in clean cursive at the bottom of a real estate transaction I had never agreed to. Worse yet, the date of the signature was May 13th. May 13th, I whispered to myself. That was the exact day I had delivered a panel talk at the National Librarian Symposium in Seattle, hundreds of miles away. I hadn't just been unavailable, I had been publicly present. The adrenaline hit me in waves. At first disbelief, then anger, and beneath it a cold kind of focus. I opened my email and searched for the flight confirmation, departed May 11th, returned May 16th. Attached to it was my itinerary and even a digital photo of me on stage, which Linda Morrison, the event coordinator, and an old colleague of mine had sent me with a note. You crushed it up there, Claire. I stared at that photo, now zooming in on the date and metadata, heart pounding. There was no doubt. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't even been in the state. Pulling out a yellow legal pad, I wrote 2 words in capital letters, legal action. By 10 a.m., I was on the phone with Andrea Cole, a lawyer recommended by a friend. Her voice was sharp, precise, but kind. The kind of person who didn't waste time, but made you feel like yours still mattered. Forged signatures, especially on estate assets, are not just civil matters, Claire, she said after hearing the basics. That's criminal. And if your grandfather's will had stipulations, we might be dealing with a breach of fiduciary duty as well. Do I have a case, I asked. You have more than a case, she replied. You have proof. Meet me at my office this afternoon with everything you have. I hung up and exhaled. Then I printed everything: the symposium schedule, my flight details, the event photos, the forged contract, and Grandpa's scanned will, which I had found in the bottom of his old dresser drawer before I left the house. At 1:00 p.m., I was sitting across from Andrea in her office downtown. Her walls were lined with law books and framed photos of previous clients, shaking her hand. I handed her my file. She read through it quickly, occasionally circling a word or making a note. This signature was traced, she said, pointing to mine. Look at the slight hesitation on the downstroke of the H, classic sign of forgery. Whoever did this, they were good. But not perfect. She slid the file into her briefcase. I'll file an emergency injunction to freeze the transaction. It'll stop the sale temporarily until the court can review your claims. That night, I walked through my apartment in a daze. The silence wasn't calming. It was full of anticipation, like the whole place was waiting for what would come next. I created a new folder on my computer and titled it, "They Forgot I Read Everything." Inside, I saved every PDF, every scanned note, every photo. I backed it up to a hard drive, then another. I wasn't going to lose this. The next morning, I received an email from Andrea. The subject line was short: transaction, frozen, review pending. I stared at it for a long time. They had signed my name like I wouldn't notice, like I didn't matter. But they forgot I notice everything, especially the fine print. And now I had just begun to read them back their own story, word for word, line by line. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about every time I had been spoken over, ignored, sidelined. This time, they weren't going to silence me. This time they were going to hear me whether they liked it or not. I opened my notebook and began writing the next phase of my plan. If they thought a fake signature could bury me, they clearly didn't know who raised me. Grandpa always said I had the kind of mind that remembered what mattered. And now it was time to make sure everyone else remembered too. The problem wasn't that they showed up, it's that they still believed they had a right to walk in. That morning, the salt air coming through the screened windows tasted sweeter than it had in days. I was barefoot in the kitchen, slicing up pears for breakfast, when I heard the hum of an unfamiliar car engine outside. Not a delivery truck, not a neighbor. I didn't rush to the window. I knew who it was before I looked. My mother's silver Lexus idled in the gravel driveway like it still belonged there. A second later, Camille stepped out from the passenger side, slamming the door with the kind of entitlement that vibrated off the wood siding. I waited. Let them make the first move. Let them believe I was still the Clara who once waited by the phone for a text back, a kind word, a scrap of belonging. They made it halfway up the porch before I opened the door. "You can't be serious," Camille said, her voice tight. "Good morning," I replied, stepping aside just enough to make them notice I wasn't inviting them in. Barbara clutched her purse like it held the last of her pride. "We thought we could talk." Privately, I tilted my head. "Like when you sold off my furniture in the estate sale and forgot to call me." Camille crossed her arms. "That house was too much for you, and you know it. Dad wanted what was best for all of us. He also wanted the will read," I said calmly, "which you delayed for 2 months. Silence. That was always their fallback. When they couldn't explain, they ignored. When they couldn't control, they attacked. That evening, I received a message from a college friend. "Clara, did you see this?" Attached was a link to a local TV station's feature, "Young Woman Uses Loophole to Seize Coastal Family Property." The headline was cruel, the tone insinuating. There was no mention of the will, no mention of the forged documents I uncovered. Just a slow pan of the beach house and an old photo of me at 16 smiling beside my father. The voiceover sources say the property was expected to stay within family consensus, but legal twists allowed the youngest daughter to take over. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply clicked the window closed and opened a folder on my desktop, receipts. I uploaded screenshots, texts between Mom and Camille. "Clara won't do anything. She never does." A voice memo Camille sent to a friend. "Let her rot in that drafty house. It suits her." A video from 3 years ago, my father in his last lucid spring sitting under the arbor saying to a neighbor filming their garden, "I want Clara to have this place. She understands it." No commentary, no explanation. I packaged the material in a zipped file and forwarded it to Eleanor Hart, a regional journalist I trusted. She'd once done a series on elder care abuse and had a reputation for checking her facts twice. "Subject for your consideration." No name, no plea, just truth. 2 days later, the same news station aired a follow-up. "New evidence confirms original heir designation in disputed property case." They ran the clip of my father under the arbor. They read lines from the will. They ended with a quote from Eleanor's voiceover. "Not all silence is complicity. Sometimes it's the sound of someone gathering proof." Camille took her Facebook profile private. Barbara deleted a vague post about betrayal. And the stream of passive-aggressive voicemails I used to get turned to static. I never got an apology. But I didn't need one. That Sunday, I brewed coffee and stepped onto the porch, just as the sun began to spread honey-colored light over the lawn. I sat on the swing my father built, letting it rock gently beneath me. The phone was quiet. The air was clean. The house was still mine. They thought the story would belong to whoever spoke first. They forgot what happens when the quiet one decides to speak last. And speak in proof. Sometimes truth doesn't arrive with a shout. It arrives with documents. And the power of who presses send. Sometimes the loudest change doesn't come from what you say, but from who no longer knocks. It had been a full week, since the judge dismissed my family's case. Their attempt to take back what was never theirs to begin with had failed in front of a quiet courtroom and a tired judge, who looked like he'd seen one too many families crumble over things they never built. I hadn't spoken to anyone in the Hastings line since. Not a call, not a text, not even a comment under the anonymous articles still floating around online. The silence was so thick, it almost had a weight to it. But it wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was the silence of absence. The silence of air finally filtering through a long, clogged vent. I woke up that Sunday with the sound of seagulls outside the window and the faint smell of salt through the open panes. The ocean didn't care about family politics. It just kept arriving. Savannah had stayed the weekend. She'd brought fresh scones and a playlist called Post-Verdict Peace. We spent most of Saturday wiping down windowsills and folding sheets, but it felt more like a ritual than a chore. Like we were clearing out ghosts. That morning I found her on the back porch, feet up on the railing, coffee mug in one hand and a book in the other. "Sleep okay?" she asked without looking up. "Better than I expected. Still not used to how quiet it is." She closed the book and smiled. "That's because it's not quiet. It's just no longer hostile. There's a difference." I nodded, then wandered back into the house. There was a letter sitting on the entry table. No postmark. Just my name written in a hand I knew too well. Camille. Inside, her handwriting was as precise as her tone had always been. No apologies, no ownership, just, "We all made mistakes. Let's not ruin our name because of one property." I stared at the sentence until the ink felt sharp. Even now, they didn't see the house as a legacy, only as leverage. Still trying to broker peace with the same hands they used to lock me out. I didn't answer. I folded the letter and placed it in the box I had labeled Unreturned Things. Then I went to the bookshelf and picked up a cloth to dust. One by one, I pulled down books, wiped their spines, ran my fingers along margins where my grandfather had left notes. "Truth needs tending," one note said. "It's like a garden. You forget it for too long and all you're left with are weeds." By noon, Savannah and I had rearranged the study. We recentered the desk, hung the wind chime he once made out of old keys, laid out fresh paper in the drawer. The whole room smelled like lemon oil and old wood, like it had sighed with relief. That evening, I walked the property alone. Not to check, just to greet. The tree in the back, the one my grandfather planted when I was born, had grown tall enough to brush the power lines. I stood beneath it and whispered, "We're okay." When I returned to the porch, Savannah had gone. She'd left behind a note on the counter. "Don't answer doors that only remember you when they need something." I smiled. In the quiet that followed, I lit a candle. Just one. No scents, no music. Just the flicker. Then I sat down at the dining table with a pen and a journal and wrote my own name in capital letters. "This peace is earned, not gifted, and I will protect it like he protected me." The wind tapped at the window, but it wasn't knocking. Some silences aren't empty, they're sacred. And mine? It was finally whole. The moment I stepped into the boardroom at Sterling Legal, it no longer felt like I was showing up to plead for something. I was claiming what had always been mine. The lights were too white, the air conditioning too high, and the long walnut table too polished, but none of that could chill what I carried in my chest. Skylar Martinez was already seated, calm as always, a stack of folders at her side, like towers of truth waiting to be dropped. She glanced up and gave me that quiet nod that said, "We're not here to argue, we're here to end it." Vera arrived next, all in gray and silk, her pearl earrings catching the light like weapons of subtlety. Griffin followed 2 steps behind, wearing the look of a man already halfway to regret. Zinaya swept in last, too loud, too smug, like she hadn't yet realized the tide had already turned. Edward Jackson was present as a neutral party. Once the intended buyer of the house, now a reluctant witness, seated at the far end, hands folded over his leather folio. He didn't smile when Vera walked in. That was new. It started as most battles do, with silence. Then Vera's lawyer cleared his throat and spoke a petition challenging my legal capacity to inherit the house. They called me emotionally compromised. They referenced my job as a librarian as proof of my detachment from financial realities. They even cited my single status as if that disqualified me from being trusted with legacy. I didn't flinch. Skylar waited until they were done, then opened her folder without a word. She laid out one by one the documents that shattered their claims, a psychological evaluation requested and endorsed by the court, confirming my full mental capacity. A sworn affidavit from a forensic handwriting analyst proving the sale contract had been forged. Community statements from over a dozen locals who had known my grandfather and me since I was a child, every one of them validating our bond. Then came the flash drive. Skylar handed it to the technician who loaded the file onto the screen. The video played grainy but clear. Ellis Granger, my grandfather's old friend, filmed months before the end. He faced the camera, voice rough but steady. If they ever try to move her out, show this. Claire isn't just my granddaughter. She's the soul of this house. She remembers what matters. Then, after a long pause, his eyes softened. I didn't leave her this house because she needed it. I left it because it needs her. The room held its breath. Edward Jackson leaned forward. Had I seen this before, I would never have agreed to the transaction. I was misled. I hereby withdraw all interest and affirm that I was presented with falsified documents. Skylar looked to the judge. We request final affirmation of Claire Hastings as the sole heir and formal referral of all forged materials for federal investigation. The gavel came down. The judge didn't need to raise his voice. The court finds in favor of Claire Hastings. All previous transactions are null. The defendant's actions will be submitted for further review by the district attorney's office. This case is closed. My breath left me in one long, quiet wave. After the courtroom cleared, Skylar rested a hand on my shoulder. It's yours. Not because he gave it, but because you never let go. 2 weeks later, I stood in the front hallway of the house. My house. The light came in through the windows the same way it had when I was 5, chasing dust motes through the air. But now it felt like it belonged to me completely, not just in deed, but in meaning. I opened the cedar trunk Grandpa had once used for blueprints. Inside were notebooks, sketches, letters. One was addressed to me. If you're reading this, you remembered to listen. Good. You were never the loud one, but you always paid attention. That's why I left you the part of this house that matters most, not the walls, the why. I set the letter down with trembling fingers and looked around the study. By the end of the month, I had filed paperwork to convert the house into a private foundation, a quiet resource center for students and artists with a reading room, a mentorship program, and a small garden named after Grandpa. Griffin never called. Vera sent one last email. You always did think you were better. I didn't respond. Zanaya tried to show up once. She stood at the gate in oversized sunglasses waiting. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked to the porch and opened the brass panel beneath the mailbox. Inside, I placed one final folded piece of paper, my grandfather's last sketch. A picture of the house with 3 words beneath. She remembered everything. The most powerful part of legacy is that you can't take it away from the person who lived it. They tried to silence me. They tried to erase me. But they forgot. I was the one who knew where the foundation began, and now it's mine to build forward. The end. They tried everything: forged documents, twisted emotions, even weaponized silence, all in an effort to erase Claire from her grandfather's legacy. But here's the truth: you can't erase someone who was written into the foundation. This wasn't just a story about property. It was about dignity, about a quiet woman choosing not to shout but to show. Claire didn't fight back with bitterness or public spectacle. She fought with facts, with the truth, and with the unwavering belief that what's right should outlast what's loud. In a world where gaslighting often goes unpunished and manipulation hides behind family ties, Claire's journey reminds us silence is not surrender. It can be strategy. Her grandfather didn't leave her a house. He left her trust in herself, in the values they shared, in the kind of justice that doesn't need a spotlight to matter. Personally, this story made me reflect on how often we're told to let it go, just to keep the peace, even when it costs us our truth. But peace built on erasure isn't peace. It's performance. Claire's quiet resistance wasn't just brave, it was necessary. Let this story be a reminder. You are allowed to protect what matters. You are allowed to speak, even if your voice shakes. And sometimes the most powerful inheritance isn't what's left in a will. It's the strength to rise when you are supposed to fold. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more real-life stories of quiet strength and justice. Because truth doesn't always shout, but it always echoes.